Hello there. Julian Richings here. Death in Supernatural and Three Finger in Wrong Turn. You're listening to Don't Go Out There. Enjoy.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Don't Go Out There Horror Movie Review Podcast, powered by the Big Three Roll Up Network. Just want to thank all our fans and listeners. I really appreciate all the support. You guys are awesome. It means the world to us. You take the time to listen to us. Super excited for this interview. We are joined today by another legend of the business with over 200 acting credits to his name, spanning nearly 5 decades. Known for his roles in Man of Steel, X-Men 3, Urban Legend, Supernatural, The Witch, and of course, the Wrong Turn franchise. Mr. Julian Richings, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing really well. It's nice to be here.
I was just naming stuff off. You've been in a lot of stuff, sir.
Yeah, well, I've got one of those faces that seems to lend itself to a lot of different shows. And, I'll never be the lead guy with this huge story arc, but I keep appearing here and there and upsetting people or murdering people or getting chased or something.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Richings, we like to start off all of our interviews just by asking what got you into acting.
Well, I think I've always been an actor. I'm a middle child in a middle class home in the middle of England. That's where I grew up. And in some ways, I felt like I was really myself when I was putting on a show. I identified with the script or the story that I was telling. And my older brother, had this peculiar talent. He had a skill where he would build environments around our backyard, our house. He'd create a circus, he'd create a spook house. And guess who he got to populate those places? His little brother. So I would get up there and I'd be doing the stunts and I'd be doing stuff. I loved it. And when he went to a youth club that put on plays, he became a set designer and I followed along and I thought, well, I can't do that. So I started to act and I thought, well, this is what I really want to do. So I guess that was what made me realize that, not only am I naturally an actor, but I can maybe make a living being an actor. And so I went from there and I trained and then I kept going.
Yes, sir. And speaking of those plays, I see you trained in drama and theater. You even toured with a stage production. Can you talk a little bit about that experience, and how that would differ from, conventional movies? I mean, do you take a different approach when you're working in theater?
Yeah, and this kind of theater that I was doing was very much like a touring rock band in a van. We'd have our set, we'd arrive at a venue, we'd put it up, we'd do the show, maybe we'd stay overnight in a motel, and then we'd drive to the next venue. It was very much rock and roll. It was an obscure kind of avant-garde show. So we relied on a very specific audience, and we basically shared the hat. We were poor, but we really enjoyed what we did. It opened a lot of doors. I came to North America. I toured North America with this company. We went to Chicago, New York, Toronto. I ended up in Toronto because I actually met the woman who was to be my wife. And wow. So that's kind of the reason that I stayed. So in terms of the technique involved, though, in acting in the theater, it's the same heart, the same soul. You got to tell a story. You got to focus on listening to the other person and responding to the other person. But the technique is different because you're not playing to the people in the room. You're playing to a camera. So you just have to adjust your performance accordingly, rather than, to the back row of the auditorium, but to the fact that the lens is right there and you have to modulate, and I've sort of learned it over the years and I've got better at it, and I've got better at figuring out all the different lenses and all the different close-ups and requirements for a performance. And and I know we're going to talk about some of the technical stuff I've done, like movies like Wrong Turn, where as an actor, where you're playing a creature or a monster, and you got a lot of special effects, that technical awareness becomes really important.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Richings, you've had an amazing career spanning all types of genres. You seem to be more drawn to like sci-fi and horror. Do you enjoy the wide range or shift the opportunities of characters those types of genres allow you to play and create?
I like them. I like to inject humor into them as much as I can, because I figure that if there's a villain or a weird-looking guy, and he's also got a twinkle in his eye, or he's funny, it makes him more interesting, and you don't quite know how to take him, and you don't know how creepy he is. For instance, Supernatural, the TV series, what drew me to that was the fact that there I'm playing the Grim Reaper, but he's not just this serious guy that's, oh my God, death has walked into the room. He's also a guy that's got a real life to him and a real sense of humor and a sense of irony too. So I like that. And I like injecting the unexpected into what are traditionally bad guy roles.
Absolutely. And I'm sure you're probably tired of answering some of these questions, but as a horror podcast, and a huge fan of you in particular, we've got to ask about one of my favorite horror movies, Wrong Turn. You brought it up earlier. You're the most memorable part of that movie as Three Finger. I mean, can you talk a little bit about that role? It's fantastic.
It was a lot of fun. I mean, I had the privilege to work with Stan Winston, who is the master of special effects, who created, Edward Scissorhands and the Terminator and all those incredible creatures. Right. And for me, what was so great was that Stan really understood how to work with an actor in the same way that with Johnny Depp, he kind of got me to go to his studio on several occasions and work with me and create a mask and create a persona really that I could move with, so that I didn't feel constricted by the prosthetics and the lenses and all the different stuff that I was wearing. The exact opposite. It was like wearing a sort of a mask that enabled me to enter into this incredible character. So that was really cool. It was really cool. It took a while to figure it out, to figure out how I would move, because we figured out I had two huge brothers, and therefore, it would be much more effective if I was fast and darting and quick. And then I introduced the idea of a laugh, which we tried and we worked on, and we developed it bit by bit by bit. It was quite deliberate, but a lot of fun, a lot of craft went into it.
Yeah, that laugh has become, the trademark of that entire franchise. Absolutely.
Yeah. And of course, I only did the first one. So I've seen some of the other ones, but I haven't been involved in them directly. But for me, it's kind of, it's an honor to think that the franchise has gone on and it's got an audience like that.
Absolutely.
Oh, absolutely. Your character, Three Finger, was the only one from the first one that made it to the second one, and the third Wrong Turn was all about Three Finger. So it's very, it says a lot that your role and your portrayal was so good that it kept going on in the franchise. So that's awesome. We had Robert Englund on the show. We asked him this, and I'm curious about the same with your role as Three Finger. Can you walk us through what you may recall about the makeup process for getting, the character of Three Finger?
Well, it was a long time ago, so it was old school, and the applications were, silicone that had to be put on very carefully, and they had to be removed. I think that was the big difference to now, whereas we have more of a disposable technology where we can put something on and that's it. Back in the day, it took 4 hours to put all the different facial pieces on and all the rest of it, and then 2 hours to take it off at the end of the day. And it was those 2 hours at the end of the day that really were tough, because you're there and you've been inside of this cocoon for this long and sweat's coming down, but it's very meticulously being taken off piece by piece by piece to be preserved and cleaned for the following day. So that was a huge challenge. Putting it on, not such a big deal. It's kind of relaxing. There's a clear process. It takes a long time, but there's a lot of good music, loud. The guys are really cool. The special effects guys kind of let me go into my own world, let me shut my eyes, and I just listened to them. And for an actor, actors get very caught up in performance and aesthetics and kind of the superficial stuff of ego as well, you know. So when you're working with a special effects team, it's really cool. It really brings you down to earth. And I loved listening to them go on at length about the special effect in Taxi Driver, where the guy gets his thumb shot off, and you know they go into the minutiae of how it was arranged, and it was really cool. And it reminded me too that, you know, this is a craft as well as it's artistic, and we make choices, and it's a kind of, fame is an ephemeral thing, but at the root of it all is our tradesmen and craftspeople, and we all rely on technicians to light us properly, to create the set, and to make us look good. And it's I think that's one of the reasons I've lasted a long time and I've done a lot of things, is that I work well with people and I have a deep respect for the other departments in the film industry.
Right, absolutely. And you know, Nico brought up Robert Englund. You know, you were actually in one of my favorite movies with him in Urban Legend. It's funny. It's funny, your character. I mean, it's such a red herring in that movie, and they and they named you just a weird janitor. So,
yes.
I mean, do you have any recollections of being on set and interactions with Mr. Englund, or?
I remember he was a really gracious guy. I mean, we all knew who he was, right? Like, right. So, and I was like a kind of I had a resume, but nothing like him. And so in those situations on set, you know, there's always a bit of a pecking order, and you're always very aware of not overstepping your bounds and being respectful to, you know, senior professionals and stuff. But I do remember him as being very gracious, very approachable, and very down to earth. And I think that's the case with a lot of people that do a lot of horror, because at the end of the day, when you're doing a horror movie, every scene is about selling the gag, right? It's about how are we going to set this up so that it gets maximum chills, not, you know, do I look good? How am I? Like, it's about like, how do we make this work? So if you're working with George Romero, or you're working with Rob Schmidt in Wrong Turn, it's all about like, what's the moment that's coming up? And we're all working together to make that work.
You know, looking back on it, Urban Legend has a ton of horror legends in it. Yourself, Robert Englund, Danielle Harris, Brad Dourif. That movie is awesome. I love it. But Mr. Richings, I wanted to ask you about another movie that you were in. I want to ask you about The Witch. You played the governor. You know, I'm going to pick that movie for us to review in the future. Can you just talk to us about that role a little bit?
Yeah, I play the governor. It was Robert Eggers' first feature film. I knew when I worked on it, when I first met him, that I was dealing with a major talent, somebody who was kind of cut from a different cloth. He not only was prepared, but he was like super into the world of The Witch and had done so much research. He could talk at length in the manner of the Puritans, you know, from way back. Like he really had it. He has a production designer's attention to detail. Absolutely. And right down to every choice of clothing that was made, right down to the forest, the area of the forest that we worked in was unspoiled and true to the time. You know, most forest areas have been affected by agriculture over the years. He made it clear that he wanted the exact replica of the clearings and the deep woods and that sense of the period. So it was really cool working with somebody that committed to his vision. It's also his first time film. So I wasn't also, there was a sense where he was learning as he was going along too. So he was very open. I imagine that when you work with some of the masters and they're in their 15th and 16th films, you know, it becomes kind of harsh. You know, they know what they want, they're going to get it. And you better watch out if you've got any ideas of your own. But with Robert, he was extremely collaborative. And even though he was so clear about what he wanted about the world that we were inhabiting, he was also very open. We did a bunch of shooting of. I'm only involved in the very opening of the movie. We shot a little more than you actually see in the final cut. We shot a few scenes, but Robert quickly realized that the movie really begins once the family is outcast into the wood. You can't do that much with stuff in the village. It becomes a bit soap opera-y. It's really about being haunted and being out there. So it was just fun. It was just a very short shoot for me, but it was great to be immersed in that world. And even though some of the lead actors, like Anya, has become very well known since, obviously, there was a real sense that we were an acting ensemble. That there were no stars. We were all trying to speak in the authentic dialect of the time, and that we were focused on Robert's story. We were really trying to be authentic and accurate with his story, and so I think that's what created a tremendous spell with the movie. Because if nothing else, the movie really takes you into a strange place. Right. And that requires everybody being on the same page.
I just have a quick follow-up with that. The Witch, The Wrong Turn, they're both horror movies, but they're on different, realms of type. Can you tell us just a difference of being on set of The Witch compared to something like A Wrong Turn?
Well, Wrong Turn is much more of a popular horror film, right? Like a traditional shocker, right? With a bunch of moments that are carefully orchestrated. Like Stan Winston is the master of knowing, like Spielberg, how long do you allow the shark to be seen in Jaws? You can't have it for too long. You got to have a moment of shock and gone, and another moment. And Stan was the master of that, right down to a stopwatch, making sure that the scenes weren't too long. I feel with The Witch, it was more of a creeping, brooding menace that was there all the way through. And in many ways, the horror came through other sources, like the animals and the noises and that amazing soundtrack. So it was a slow build. So that goes back to what I was saying about being a member of an ensemble, like an acting ensemble, producing a particular tone.
Right.
The movie was very creepy movie.
Absolutely. And speaking of differences in sets, as a sci-fi and DC fan myself, I've got to ask about, Man of Steel. Of course, you played Laura M. Obviously, that's such a huge blockbuster type film. What's the difference? What's the biggest difference in your mind, in working on something like that versus, one of these smaller productions that you were talking about?
Just scale, just the size, the size of the thing. The same principles are there. You're dealing with a lot more special effects in terms of this is more within a modern world, rather than going back to Wrong Turn, which is kind of old school. So I spent a lot of time looking at a tennis ball. I'm looking up at a tennis ball sticking up, because I know that's the eye line, and I know it's going to be CGI'd in, and the image is going to be there. So there's more of that kind of green screen make-believe going on.
Right.
But you're still investing the same. You're still having to listen to the other guys and to allow your imagination to envelop you. And then there's still long moments of waiting around. Like I remember distinctly, there's Russell Crowe kind of sitting around waiting for a special effect to happen. And he's very patiently just kind of sat there, and people are running around him going, "Oh my God, Russell, are you okay? Are you okay? Everything good?" "Yeah, it's fine." Like he's paced himself. He knows that it's about getting the special effects right, and letting his ego sort of sit there for a bit, and then he'll come up and he'll barnstorm the place when he's needed to, so there's that sort of same principles to make the thing work. It's just that in many ways you have to allow the technical side to dictate what else is going on.
Right, absolutely. So just, shifting gears a little bit, Chaos Walking just came out this past March. Stars Daisy Ridley, Tom Holland. You played the role of Galt. Can you talk a little bit about working on that?
Yeah, I had fun, but it really felt like a work in progress. Like I got to say, and Doug Lyman, who was the director, who has created franchises. He created the Bourne franchise, right. And the Tom Cruise movies, right? So he there was really a sense that he was trying to make this really complicated idea work. And I was there at sort of ground zero where we were trying stuff, and we knew that a lot of it would just get thrown out. Like we were kind of offering it up. We were doing stuff. We were shifting. There were even times when we would do a scene, and one guy would do one particular action, and then we'd switch characters and we'd do different stuff. Like there was a real sense of experimentation. And that was actually kind of cool. I've very rarely been on a set where there's enough trust in the director and the product to be able to do that. Normally producers are going, we've been on this show like, you know, 3 days now, and we don't have a, and Doug's still going, well, no, we'll try it a bit differently. Because the reason was that the whole thing is that the characters, the male characters display a noise that's visible above their heads because it's taken from a comic book, right? So Doug's big challenge was, how do we render that into film? How do we shoot it in such a way that there's still space for CGI for the actors to have this stuff above them? And how do we refine the story down to make sense in a cinematic form, not just a comic book form? So there was all this experimentation going on. So I felt like I was part of a grand experiment rather than a big movie. Right. And in fact, a lot of my, I mean, I think if you sneeze, you might miss me. Oh. Yeah, okay. Because I'm kind of like, I'm around and I'm in the village and I'm about, but they're not with the final cut that they came up with. A lot of the work that we did in a couple of the towns are sort of gone. But hey, you know, I was sort of part of that creating that world. So I don't feel, oh no, all my work has gone. What's happened? I'm just it's just an unusual situation. Normally, there's much more pressure for product, and in this one, there was a real sense of experimentation.
Absolutely. You know, it looks like you have a few projects on the docket coming up. You've got Stanleyville, Salvation. I'm not sure how much you can actually talk about those, but I mean, is there anything you can tell us about those films? And Salvation particularly looks interesting because I love apocalyptic type of films.
It's certainly apocalyptic. It's very low budget, lo-fi guy waking up in a post-apocalypse and making his way, complete with a sort of handheld camera crew, very light, but able to traverse all kinds of strange environments, sewers, different places that you would normally not go into. So it's a really interesting film by a guy who I think we're going to hear a lot about in the future. His name, I always struggle with his name. I'm going to read it. I know him as Bennett DeBee, but his full name is Bennett de Brabander. But anyway, so a really cool guy. And yeah, I think he's got a lot more ideas in the can, and you're going to hear from him in the future. Again, actually, in that film, I don't have an awful lot in there. I was very much part of a sort of an important moment, and that was it. And I knew him, and I knew some of his colleagues, and I was happy to collaborate with them. Something that I can talk about that's just beginning to be advertised right now is a show that's coming out on Epix in the US, and that's a Stephen King adaptation of his short story, Jerusalem's Lot, and it's been turned into a series called Chapelwaite, and it stars Emily Hampshire and Adrian Brody. And that's coming out in August. And that we actually shot it during COVID times on the east coast of Canada, where there was a kind of a bubble where no COVID was reaching anybody there. So we were all in isolation. which was perfect to do a
Right.
Stephen King project.
Yes, sir.
And we were all in these creepy, puritanical areas, churches and graveyards and stuff, and it was really cool. And Adrian was really good, and I mean, he's an A-lister, quite rightly, and he brings a lot of gravity and a lot of feeling to the story. So there's that coming. I'm excited about that. And Stanleyville, which was the other one that you mentioned.
Yes, sir.
It's gonna be premiered at the Fantasia Festival in Montreal in August, and then it will get a release soon after. It's one of those films where it's hard to define it. It's definitely a genre film. It's definitely kind of futuristic because it's absurd. It's a bunch of people locked in a room competing for a sports utility vehicle. And they go into ridiculous lengths. Like they start off with balloon blowing competitions, and then they become more and more intense to the point where they're killing each other over a sports utility vehicle. It's sort of absurd and funny and crazy and all the above, So I'm looking forward to seeing what people make of it, because it's odd. It's odd in a really cool way. So I've got a few things happening, and that's the kind of actor I am. I have my finger in a lot of different pies, and that's how I like things.
Oh yes, sir. Mr. Richings, you do the convention circuit some. I know with COVID that has been few and far between lately, but the conventions are picking up a little bit.
Yeah.
Do you have any convention scheduled that you're going to? And if you don't mind, we always like to ask, what's your funniest or most embarrassing or weirdest moment you've ever had at a convention? We've heard some good ones.
Well, I can tell you, first of all, that I am going to Orlando, Florida. There's a convention there in September. It's one of the first ones back, in the flesh. It's a supernatural convention hosted by Creation Entertainment. So I'm really looking forward to that, and actually being up close, fairly close, not too close, but close with fans, and actually in the same room and chatting to them. So that's exciting. But yeah, I've had some fun times at conventions. I've done a lot of them. One of them, Supernatural has a massive demographic, right?
Absolutely.
It has a huge fan base. And so whenever I'm at a convention, people generally recognize me as Death, the Grim Reaper. And I guess my funniest experience was when it was actually in Texas, where I was on like the 33rd floor of a hotel, and it happened to be the same convention center that we were performing in. And I was going down, and I pressed the button, and I've got my minder right there, and we're going down, and a guy gets on the 32nd floor, and he stands there and looks at me, and he's looking at me and doesn't quite know what to say, and we're both sort of standing there awkwardly, and we go down a bunch of floors, and then suddenly the doors open, and there's a whole bunch of fans, supernatural fans, that start to walk into the elevator, take one look at me, and go, scream. They refuse to get in the elevator, and then the doors close, right? But the funniest thing is, for the next 20 floors, I'm going down with this other guy who's looking at me like going, who the hell is this guy? What is he doing? Why are people screaming at him in an elevator? Am I safe? So anyway, that was, I get many situations like that, and I have a lot of fond experiences through Supernatural. Lots of people, would do things like, I'll be walking down the street and people go, I love Death. I love you, Death. And I go, it's okay. It's from a show. It's a show that I'm on to explain it to people, But it is definitely a world and a fan base that's been my privilege to kind of get to know over the last, I guess, 10 years.
That's just awesome to hear, man. Mr. Richings, we're getting ready to wrap up. We didn't get to really ask you about him, but I just want to say I saw where you had a role in Dead Silence. Love that movie. Uncredited role, but I love that movie. And you were in Saw 4, one of my favorite Saw movies. You've been in so much horror, so I just wanted to thank you for your contribution to our favorite genre. Is there anything else you'd like to plug or let our audience know about before we let you go?
Well, I'm just happy that we're all sort of getting to the point now where we're all going to be out there and visiting and seeing each other, and it's an exciting time, and I'm looking forward to making more movies, and I'm looking forward to people seeing them in the theaters, because especially with the horror genre, you need to share that response, that anticipation and that communal gasp or the scream. So that's all. I'm glad that, touch wood, we're coming to an end of this phase.
Right.
Absolutely.
And you brought up the convention circuit too, but the horror community is just so, they're not what you would expect. I mean, they're just everybody's so friendly. We've been doing this show for a while, and everybody we've talked to, everybody we've had on, it's just been so nice and just so down to earth and just not at all, big Hollywood or anything like that.
I think you have to park your ego at the door if you're doing the horror genre, and you have to just get on with it. And the fan base is very knowledgeable too. People are into horror big time, and you can't BS people. People see through it. They get it, and it's a very well educated fan base.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us.
You're very welcome, guys. Thank you for having me.